Don't make a scene, son.
Who made you two live out here? Marcus sent us out here. I'm taking you both home. Where is the $431,000? I took care of Mom and Dad. By locking them in a chicken coop? You robbed your own family. I once wanted to tear it down. Then why did you keep it? To remember how close we came to losing everything. No one will ever take it from us again.
He hadn't told anyone he was coming. Not his assistant, not his attorney, not the neighbor whose number he'd kept in his phone for 12 years without once dialing it. He drove south from Roanoke with both hands on the wheel, and a single thought he could not shake loose. A quarterly property report had flagged a document filed with the county clerk's office under his father's name, and the document described an agreement to sell the family farm. No one had told him. No one had even hinted. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. He had left Harlan, Virginia at 22 years old with a scholarship letter and a backpack. 20 years later, he ran a logistics company out of Austin that employed over 400 people and moved freight across 14 states. His name appeared in industry publications. His company had been valued at just under $400 million in the most recent audit. None of that had changed the fact that his parents lived on an 85-acre farm in the Appalachian foothills of Southwest Virginia, and that he had not set foot there in 3 years. He told himself the monthly wire transfers were his presents. $4,500 sent to his brother Marcus on the first of every month, specifically to cover his parents' groceries, utilities, medication, and any repairs the farmhouse needed. Marcus was the one who had stayed. Marcus was the one who managed the property, filed the paperwork, drove their parents to appointments. Ethan was the one who paid for all of it. That had been the arrangement since their father's first surgery 7 years ago, and it had seemed from a distance to be working. The document he'd seen in the report was 2 pages long. The second page listed a closing target date: 17 days from today. County Road 7 in October was the same as it had always been: narrow gravel, edged, canopied by oak and maple that had been there longer than anyone in Harlan could remember. The air through the cracked window smelled of wood smoke and fallen leaves. Ethan recognized the fence line at the Crawford place, the grain elevator at the edge of town, the steeple of First Baptist visible above the tree line. Things that had not changed. Things he had not thought about in years. He turned into the coal property at 4:17 in the afternoon. Marcus's truck sat in front of the main farmhouse. The lights were on inside. Ethan pulled over before reaching the driveway and sat for a moment with the engine running. The farmhouse was the same structure his father had built in 1968, 2 stories, a wraparound porch, white paint that needed refreshing. His father had poured the foundation himself. His mother had planted the rose bushes along the front walk. Everything looked normal. That was what made something in his chest go tight. He got out of the car. Before he had taken 3 steps toward the house, he heard a voice from across the road. Ethan Cole. It was not a question. Sarah Whitfield was standing at her fence gate wearing a canvas coat and holding a pair of gardening gloves she hadn't put on yet. She was in her early 60s, gray-haired, steady-eyed. She had been his parents' neighbor for 30 years. She looked at him the way people look at someone they've been waiting for. "Before you go up there," she said, "I need you to walk with me first." He did not argue. Something in her voice told him arguing would cost him something he couldn't spare. She led him around the side of the property, past the fence line, through the gate that opened into the backfield. The sun was dropping behind the ridge. The light was orange and low, and long shadows reached across the grass. Ethan followed her past the old barn, past the wood storage shed, and around the back corner of the property toward the cluster of outbuildings his father had maintained for 40 years. He saw it before Sarah said anything. The old chicken coop stood at the edge of the yard, maybe 60 feet from the main house. It had been empty for at least 10 years. The family had stopped keeping hens when Ethan was still in high school. It was a small structure, maybe 14 feet by 10. The walls were original board and batten siding weathered gray. Someone had nailed a sheet of plywood over the gap where the original door had rotted. A single extension cord ran from a junction box on the barn wall and disappeared through a hole at the base of the plywood panel. A rectangle of light showed around the edges of the door. Someone was inside. Ethan stood very still. He heard Sarah say something behind him, but the words didn't reach him. He walked the last 30 feet and put his hand flat against the plywood. He pushed it open. His father was sitting in an aluminum lawn chair with a paperback novel in his lap and a battery-powered lantern on the upturned crate beside him. His reading glasses were low on his nose. He looked up when the door opened, and his expression cycled through 3 things very quickly: surprise, recognition, and then something Ethan could not name, a complicated thing that looked almost like relief and almost like shame, and was entirely neither. His mother was on the far side of the small space folding a blanket. There was a cot against the wall, a sleeping bag, a plastic bin with what appeared to be clothes and toiletries, a small electric space heater. On the floor near the door, 2 pairs of boots, an umbrella. His mother looked at him and said the thing she always said when she was frightened and didn't want anyone to know. "Don't make a fuss." Ethan's mouth was open. He closed it. He looked at the cot. He looked at the lantern. He looked at the extension cord snaking under the door from the barn. He looked at his father, who had set down the novel without marking his page. He could not speak. There was something moving in his chest that was too large for his throat to pass, and he stood in the doorway of the old chicken coop while the October light died behind him, and did not say a single word. It was his father who finally broke the silence. Robert Cole set his book on the crate, removed his reading glasses, and folded them with the deliberateness of a man who has learned not to rush important moments. He looked at Ethan steadily. He said, "Shut the door. You're letting the cold in." Ethan stepped inside and pulled the plywood door closed behind him. His mother reached for his hand. He took it. Outside headlights swept across the yard, Marcus's truck moving from the driveway around to the back of the property. Marcus came around the corner of the barn with a flashlight and a posture that suggested he had already decided how this conversation was going to go. He was wearing a barn coat over a flannel shirt, and he moved with the unhurried ease of a man on his own property, which Ethan noted was precisely the message. "Ethan." He stopped outside the coop door. The flashlight was at his side, not shining at anyone. "Didn't know you were coming." "I know," Ethan said. Marcus looked past him into the coop, took in the scene: his parents, the cot, the space heater, and then looked back at Ethan with an expression that managed to be simultaneously apologetic and explanatory, as if the situation were self-evident and only required a little context. "It's temporary," Marcus said. "The main house has a moisture problem in the master bedroom, mold behind the drywall. I've got a contractor lined up for next month. Dad didn't want to deal with the dust and the disruption, so we moved them out here while we wait." Ethan looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at his father. Robert was watching Marcus with the particular stillness of a man who has heard something said many times and is no longer interested in responding to it. His hands were folded in his lap. He did not correct what Marcus had said. He did not confirm it either. He simply watched. "How long have they been here?" Ethan asked. "Couple of weeks," Marcus said. Helen was still holding Ethan's hand. He felt her fingers tighten very slightly. "A couple of weeks," Ethan repeated. "It's fine," Marcus said. "They've got heat, they've got light. It's not permanent. Mom, tell him it's fine." Helen looked at her younger son. Her expression was the same one she'd worn when Ethan was 12 and had broken his arm falling out of the hayloft. and she'd held his face in both hands and said he was going to be all right, with a voice so steady you'd believe her even if you could see the bone. She was doing that now. She was steadying herself by steadying him. "It's fine," she said quietly. Ethan let another moment pass. Then he released his mother's hand and turned to his father. "Pack what you need," he said. "Both of you." Marcus stepped forward. "Ethan, come on. You don't need to make a hole, I'm not asking you." Ethan kept his eyes on his parents. "I'm telling them. Pack what you need tonight. We're going to the inn." Marcus laughed, not a real laugh, but the sound people make when they're trying to make something seem smaller than it is. You can't just show up after 3 years and start moving people around like they're living in a chicken coop, Ethan said. Silence. He said it without heat, without sharpness. He said it the way his father said true things, simply without embellishment, leaving it there in the air for anyone who wanted to pick it up. Marcus didn't pick it up. Robert stood from the lawn chair. He did it slowly, the way he'd been doing things slowly for the past several years. One hand braced on the armrest. He moved to the plastic bin in the corner and began removing items from it with the same methodical calm he applied to everything. A change of clothes, his medication bottles, his razor, his wallet which had been sitting on top of the bin rather than in his pocket, because there was no room for a pocket in a lawn chair without armrests. At the bottom of the bin, beneath a folded pair of work pants, was a metal lockbox. It was the kind that could be bought at any hardware store 8 inches long with a numerical combination and a carry handle. Robert lifted it out and set it to the side. He did not put it in the bag. He held it by the handle. Marcus watched the lockbox come out. Something moved across his face, too quick to read, but Ethan caught it. "What's in the box?" Ethan asked. "Nothing," Marcus said. "Dad keeps documents in it. It's just an organizational thing." Robert picked up the box and held it at his side and said nothing. Helen had already gathered her things quietly, efficiently, without being asked twice. She'd done it the way she'd done everything that required dignity, by not drawing attention to how much it cost her. She put on her coat, picked up her small bag, and moved toward the door. Marcus made one more attempt. "Mom, you don't have to go anywhere. This is your home. Don't let him." "Good night, Marcus." Helen walked past him into the cool dark. Ethan followed his parents to the rental car. Sarah Whitfield was standing at the edge of the yard, with her hands in her coat pockets, watching. She gave Ethan a small nod. He nodded back. Marcus called twice before they reached the highway. Ethan let both calls go to voicemail. The Harlan Inn was a clean, practical place 15 minutes from the farm. It had 12 rooms, a small lobby that smelled of pine cleaner, and a night clerk who recognized Robert Cole from the Rotary Club and greeted him with a handshake that lasted slightly longer than formal. Ethan got 2 adjacent rooms. He carried his parents' bags upstairs. His mother went to bed without much ceremony. His father sat on the edge of the room's single armchair and set the lockbox on the small round table between them. Robert looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at his son. "I've been keeping this," he said, "for about 8 months. He gave Ethan the combination." Ethan turned the dial and lifted the lid. Inside the lockbox were papers that had been folded and refolded many times, the creases soft from handling. Robert watched his son go through them in the way that a man watches something he has rehearsed alone for many months, without rushing, without explanation, waiting to see which part of the truth landed first. The bank statements were on top. They were Robert's own statements, printed from the credit union, where he and Helen had kept an account for 40 years. Ethan spread several across the table and read the columns of numbers in the poor light of the bedside lamp. He saw his wire transfers 12 months' worth arriving on the first of each month, the same amount each time. He followed the money forward. What came in from Austin was quickly transferred out to a different account. Not a joint account, not a household account, not anything with his parents' names on it. Just a routing number and an account number that Ethan did not recognize. He picked up his phone and checked the account number against his own wire transfer records. He matched them up in 30 seconds. The account Marcus had given him was called the Cole Family Care account. As far as Ethan knew, that was a household account his brother had set up to manage expenses. He'd never asked to see the statements. He'd trusted Marcus to run it properly. The account his parents had been using for groceries and utilities and medication was a different account, entirely a small checking account with their names on it, that received, according to the statements in front of him, $800 a month. $800. Marcus told us Robert said that your business had been having some difficulties. He said the amount you were able to send had gone down considerably. Ethan set the statement flat on the table. I've been sending $4,500 a month for 11 years, he said. Robert looked at the window. Outside the parking lot, lights hummed in the dark. He was quiet for a long moment in the way that people are quiet when they've known something terrible for a long time and are now finally permitted to stop pretending otherwise. I figured, Robert said finally, but I didn't know how to ask. Beneath the bank statements were two other documents. The first was a photocopy of a power of attorney. Ethan unfolded it and read it through once. His father's signature was at the bottom, along with two witness signatures and a notary seal. The date was 19 months ago. My hip surgery, Robert said before Ethan could ask. Marcus brought the paper to the hospital. He said it was standard. He said it was so he could manage things at the farm while I was recovering. Sign here, he said, and he helped me hold the pen. Ethan looked at his father. I was on pain medication, Robert said. 3 days post-surgery. I could barely read the text on my own phone. I signed it because Marcus said I should. He paused. I called the hospital's discharge coordinator a few months later and asked her what I had signed. She told me a power of attorney gives someone legal authority to act on your behalf in financial and legal matters, broadly, across the board. He spread his hands slightly. Marcus had never mentioned that part. Ethan set the power of attorney on the table beside the bank statements. He understood with the particular clarity that comes from suddenly being able to see a pattern that was always there, what Marcus had done, and why he had done it in that sequence. The surgery, the medication, the unsigned paper appearing at the bedside. The timing of it was not an accident. The second document was a letter. It had come in a sealed envelope addressed to Marcus at the Harlan Farm address, and the return address said Westbrook Development LLC in blueprint at the top left corner. The envelope had been opened, and the letter inside had been refolded and placed in the lockbox by Robert, who explained without particular drama that he had intercepted it from the mail when Marcus was in town one morning. Ethan read the letter. It was formal, businesslike. It referred to a preliminary purchase agreement. It listed the parcel, 85 acres, at the Cole property address, Harlan, Virginia. Purchase price $890,000. Target closing 17 days from today's date. The letter asked Marcus to confirm that the POA documentation provided was current and that no intervening liens or claims had been filed on the property. Ethan read the price again. $890,000. He put the letter down and opened his phone. He pulled up 2 recent land sales in the county farms he'd seen flagged in other property reports when he was looking at the document that had brought him here. Comparable parcels. Both well over $1 million. One of them at 68 acres and less favorable topography had sold the previous spring for $1.2 million. His parents' 85 acres on level ground with water access and an established farmhouse had been agreed to at $890,000. just over half of what it was worth. Dad, Ethan said. He wasn't sure what he was going to say after that. He sat for a moment with the question open. Robert looked at him steadily. He was a man who had spent 73 years building and maintaining things: fences, crops, equipment, relationships. And he had the quality that comes from decades of patient physical work, the ability to sit with difficult information without catastrophizing it. He didn't catastrophize now. "I don't know the legal parts," Robert said. "That's not my area. But I knew the letter wasn't right. That's why I kept it." Ethan stared at the papers on the table. The bank statements, the power of attorney, the Westbrook letter. "There's more," Robert said. He reached into his shirt pocket and removed a small business card. He placed it on the table. It was for a real estate agent in Roanoke, a woman's name, a firm name. On the back, in blue ballpoint, someone had written a dollar figure and a date. The figure was slightly different from the Westbrook letter, a private commission, Ethan suspected. The date was 6 weeks prior. Robert watched his son read the card. He waited. Ethan picked up his phone. It was 11:47 at night. He scrolled to a name in his contacts that he hadn't called in almost 2 years. Pat Moran. Elder law attorney, Roanoke. He'd gotten her number from a colleague 18 months ago after reading an article she'd written about financial exploitation of aging parents. He'd stored her number because it seemed like useful information to have. He had not imagined he would need it this urgently. The phone rang twice. A calm, alert voice answered. Not a sleepy voice. A voice that had taken important calls at midnight before. "Pat," Ethan said. "It's Ethan Cole. I need your help. Tonight." Patricia Moran drove up from Roanoke and was at the inn by 8:15 the following morning. She arrived with a leather briefcase, a stainless steel travel mug, and the economical manner of someone who had no interest in being impressed or impressing anyone. She was 51 years old, gray at her temples, and she had been practicing elder law for over 2 decades. She had seen most variations of what families did to each other when money and aging met in the same room. She sat across from Ethan at the small lobby table and read through the documents from the lockbox without interruption. She read the bank statements twice. She read the power of attorney once, stopped, turned back to the witness page, and read it again. She read the Westbrook letter with the same attention she'd given to a bill of sale for livestock. When she was done, she set everything flat on the table and looked at Ethan. "Tell me about the surgery," she said. He told her what his father had described. The hip replacement 19 months ago. The hospital stay. The pain medication. Marcus appearing with the document and helping Robert hold the pen. What medication was he on, and for how long? 3 days post-surgery. He said oxycodone. He wasn't clear on the dose. "We'll need hospital records," Pat said. "The medical record will show what was prescribed and when." If the POA was signed on day 2 or 3 of a post-surgical opioid prescription, there's a solid argument for cognitive impairment at the time of signing, which goes to the question of informed consent. Is that enough to void it? Possibly. Depends on what the records show and what the witnesses can say under oath. She tapped the witness page. "Who are these 2 people?" Ethan shook his head. He didn't recognize either name. Pat opened her laptop. She typed one name, then the other. She read something on her screen. Then she looked up. The second witness is listed on the Virginia Judicial System database as a character reference for a notary shop in Roanoke whose license was suspended 14 months ago for irregularities in document authentication. She said it matter-of-factly, the way a mechanic says a part is worn out. That doesn't automatically void the POA. But it raises the credibility of both witnesses, which matters in a challenge. And the first name, I know, the first name. He went to high school with Marcus. I handled a property dispute in this county 3 years ago involving his father-in-law. She closed the laptop. He's not a professional witness. He's a favor. Ethan looked at the documents. The Westbrook sale closes in 17 days. I know. Pat finished her coffee. I filed an emergency injunction at 8 this morning before I left Roanoke. Electronic filing. The court should acknowledge it by noon today. That freezes any transfer of the property pending review. She said it without triumph, just as information. That buys time. But the injunction isn't permanent. We need to move. What do we need to do? 3 tracks, she said. She set her mug down and counted on her fingers. First track challenged the validity of the POA itself, procedural defects, cognitive state at signing witness credibility. That's a civil matter before the court. Second track document the financial diversion, the money that was sent to the Cole family care account and redirected. That's elder financial abuse under Virginia law, which is a criminal offense. We'll need forensic accounting. I have someone I work with regularly. Third track the Westbrook transaction itself. That's a related civil matter. If the POA is found defective, any agreement executed under its authority is also defective. And Westbrook. They may or may not have known the POA was questionable. Their attorney would have reviewed it. Whether they did due diligence properly is a separate question. She paused. What I can tell you is that they had a financial incentive not to look too hard. The price they agreed to is approximately 40% below current market. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Marcus gets something from that difference. Pat set her pen on the table. That's one of the things I want to know. If there's a private arrangement between your brother and Westbrook, a finder's fee, a referral payment, anything structured off the books that's not just civil fraud. That's self-dealing under a fiduciary duty, which creates additional criminal exposure. Do you have any reason to believe that arrangement exists? He thought about the business card in his father's shirt pocket. The handwritten figure on the back. I don't know yet, he said. But I think we need to ask. Pat nodded. Talk to the neighbor. You mentioned someone across the road, Sarah Whitfield. Talk to her today. People who live close to a situation often know the timeline better than anyone. She picked up her briefcase. And I want to talk to your father directly whenever he's ready. Not for a formal statement, just to understand what he signed and what he was told. His account matters. Ethan walked her to her car. She paused before getting in. One more thing, she said. I need you to understand that this is going to take longer than 17 days to fully resolve. The injunction stops the sale. The challenge and the financial investigation will take months. Your brother is going to respond to every motion we file. I know, and there's something else. She looked at him steadily. Your parents are going to be under pressure throughout this process. Your brother will talk to them. He'll reframe things. He may try to convince them that what you're doing isn't in their interest. She paused. I've seen adult children successfully turn parents against the one sibling trying to protect them. It's not rare. You need to be prepared for that. Ethan thought about the way his father had looked at Marcus the night before. The stillness of it. The way Robert had not confirmed a single thing Marcus said, but had not denied it either. My father is harder to move than people think, Ethan said. That may be true, Pat said. But I said parents, not just your father. She drove away. Ethan stood in the parking lot of the Harlan Inn in the October morning, watching the car shrink down County Road 7, and considered what she hadn't quite said aloud, that his mother, who had lived her entire adult life managing other people's feelings and calling it fine, was the softer target. Sarah Whitfield had lived across from the Cole farm for 30 years, and she had the particular knowledge of a person who pays attention without making a performance of it. She knew when the mail came, which vehicles belonged to which neighbors. and when something that should have been ordinary stopped being ordinary. She had watched the Cole property the way she watched everything steadily and without comment, waiting for a moment when her watching might matter. That moment had arrived the previous evening. She met Ethan at her kitchen table the next morning with coffee already poured and a small device he didn't immediately recognize sitting in the center of the table. It was a security camera access unit, a small black box with a USB port on the side. "I put the camera in 2 years ago," she said, settling into her chair. "After there was a string of thefts at the feed co-op, my husband wanted one at the gate. Covers most of the driveway and part of the outbuildings on your parents' side. Faces east." Ethan looked at the device. "I want you to see something before I explain it," she said. She connected a laptop to the unit and pulled up a video file. "This is from 9 months ago." The footage was time-stamped. It showed the Cole driveway from a high angle, the barn and outbuildings visible at the edge of the frame. The resolution was decent, good enough to see faces, good enough to read a license plate if you needed to. In the footage, a pickup truck backed up toward the barn. 2 men got out. One was Marcus. The other was a younger man Ethan didn't recognize. They opened the tailgate and began carrying items from the main farmhouse to the truck. A wooden dresser, 2 bedside tables, a lamp with a white shade that Ethan recognized it had been in his parents' bedroom since he was a child, a small rocking chair, 3 boxes sealed with tape. The loading took 47 minutes. He knew because the timestamp told him. When they finished, they drove the truck around to the back of the property. The camera didn't follow them back there, but it caught them returning 12 minutes later with an empty truck bed. "They moved my parents' bedroom furniture to the barn," Ethan said. "Or to the coop," Sarah said. "I didn't go back there to check." "But yes," she clicked to another file. "This one is from 6 weeks later. Same driveway, different date. Marcus's truck again. This time 2 women's winter coats on hangers, a plastic storage tub, a folded quilt that Ethan recognized as his mother's, the one she had made herself over 2 winters, cream and blue squares, that had been on the foot of his parents' bed for as long as he could remember. He watched Marcus fold the quilt and put it in the truck. "That's enough," Ethan said. Sarah closed the laptop. She looked at him with the even-tempered directness of someone who has decided that politeness has its limits. "There's more," she said. "But the other things I want to tell you aren't on the camera. They're things I saw with my own eyes or heard directly." "Go ahead." "The grocery delivery service stopped about 10 months ago," she said. "Your parents had been using a service out of Roanoke Produce Basics delivered twice a month. I know because I helped your mother set it up 2 winters ago when her knee was giving her trouble. It stopped. I noticed because I didn't see the van anymore." "Did you ask about it?" "I called Helen. She said they were fine, that Marcus was handling the shopping now." Sarah wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "I should have pushed harder. I know that. But your mother has a way of making you feel like pressing her would be the rude thing to do." Ethan nodded. He knew exactly what Sarah meant. "The other thing she said is that there was a period of about 3 weeks, maybe 8 months ago, when I could see lights on in the main house, but I couldn't locate your parents. I tried calling twice. Both times Helen said she was fine. I asked if I could come by for a visit, and she said maybe next week. Next week came and went. I didn't press. Did you ever see them outside during that period?" "Once. I saw your father in the backyard near the barn early morning, maybe 6 o'clock. He was moving slowly. He had his cane." She paused. "He didn't see me. Or if he did, he didn't signal. He just went back inside. The back of the property, I mean. Not the house. The back of the property. The coop." Sarah removed the USB drive from the access unit and slid it across the table. "It's all on there," she said. "The full archive from the last 14 months. I've already made a backup copy. You take that one." Ethan picked it up. It was light in his palm. Evidence had a way of being smaller than what it meant. "I'll need to give this to my attorney," he said. "That's why I'm giving it to you." He started to stand, and she put her hand briefly on the table, not touching him, just placing it there, as if anchoring the moment. "I want you to know," she said, "that I should have called you sooner. Not when I saw the Coop light. Earlier, when the groceries stopped. When Helen started sounding the way she sounded on the phone. I knew something was wrong. I didn't want to interfere." The words sat there between them. "You called me now," Ethan said. "That matters." She walked him to the door. He stood on the porch for a moment in the October light. The USB drive in his jacket pocket, the farm across the road, visible through the bare tree line, the main farmhouse. Marcus's truck still in the driveway. He thought about his mother's quilt folded in the back of a pickup truck. He thought about his father's bedroom lamp going dark in the house his father had built with his own hands. He thought about 8 months of his parents sleeping in a converted chicken coop, while he sent money he believed was being spent on their comfort. His phone buzzed. Pat Moran's number. The court acknowledged the injunction, she said. "The property sale is frozen. Westbrook's attorneys have been notified." A pause. "Also, I got the hospital records. Your father was on oxycodone for 60 hours post-surgery. He signed the document on hour 41. Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second. "That's what we needed," he said. "It's what we needed for the POA challenge," Pat said. "The financial track is still separate. I want to bring in the forensic accountant. Can you get me access to your wire transfer records going back 11 years? "Yes." "Good. Send them today." "And Ethan." She paused. "How are your parents holding up?" He looked across the road at the farmhouse, at the ordinary-looking place that had been hollowed out of everything it was supposed to hold. "They're steady," he said. "They've been steady through all of it. That's what I can't stop thinking about." She let him have that for a moment. "Then I'll be in touch by end of day." The forensic accountant Pat worked with was a woman named Carol Timms, who had spent 17 years at the IRS before going private. She was precise, methodical, and had seen enough creative accounting in her career that very little surprised her. When she called Ethan 3 days into the review, her voice had the careful flatness of someone reporting results they've checked twice before saying aloud, "I've traced 11 years of wire transfers," she said. $4,500 per month for 132 months, beginning in the fall of 15 years ago. Total sent $594,000. Ethan had done the rough arithmetic himself. He let her continue. The receiving account, the Cole Family Care account, was opened by Marcus Cole 7 years ago at a regional bank in Roanoke. He is the sole account holder. Your parents' names appear nowhere on the account. The account is not a joint account, not a trust account, not a household account in any legal sense. It's a personal account in your brother's name. And the disbursements, that's where we get specific." Carol was quiet for a moment. The kind of pause that means she's looking at a number she wants to state accurately. "Of the 594,000, I can account for approximately 163,000 in legitimate expenditures on your parents' behalf, groceries, before the delivery service was canceled. Utility payments, Robert's medical co-pays and prescriptions, Helen's dental work. 2 HVAC repairs on the farmhouse. These are real expenditures. They happened. And the rest, the remaining $431,000, Carol said, went to 3 places. The largest portion, approximately $267,000, was transferred in installments to a personal checking account in Marcus Cole's name at a different bank. That account was used for personal expenses, including a vacation property, down payment in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, credit card payments, and what appears to be a substantial home renovation on the main farmhouse at the Harlan property. He renovated the house, Ethan thought, with my money, the house he took from my parents. The second portion, Carol continued, approximately $104,000, was paid to a series of vendors and contractors. I'm still tracing some of these, but several appear to be for work done at the Harlan property and are consistent with maintaining the property Marcus was occupying. He was using my parents' care money to maintain the house he'd moved into. That's what the records indicate, yes. Carol was neutral about it, which somehow made it worse. The third portion, approximately $60,000, is in smaller transfers that I'm still tracing. Some appear to go to the Myrtle Beach property. Some I haven't fully identified yet. I'll have the complete picture within the week. Ethan thanked her and put the phone down. He was sitting in his parents' room at the inn. His father had gone out with Roy Jennings, an old farming neighbor who'd driven over when he heard Robert was in town, and the two of them were having coffee somewhere. His mother was reading in the adjacent room. The sound of the inn, other guests in the hallway, a television somewhere carried through the walls. He sat with the number for a few minutes. $431,000. That was what Marcus had redirected over 11 years. That was what his parents' care money had become, someone else's vacation property, someone else's credit card balance, someone else's house renovations. And the parents had received $800 a month. He thought about the way his father had told him that Marcus said the amount had gone down. The way his parents had quietly accepted a reduced allowance because they didn't want to be a burden. The way his mother had called it fine. He called Pat. "I need to tell my parents," he said. I'd expect that Pat said. "How much should I tell them?" "Tell them the truth. They're adults. They've already been through the worst of it." She paused. And Robert, especially knowing the full scale, may help him understand why his testimony at the hearing matters. That evening, Ethan sat across from both his parents at the small table in his father's room. Helen had come in from next door. She sat with her hands folded and her posture straight, the way she'd sat at every serious conversation. Ethan could remember his school conferences, his father's medical appointments, the family meeting after his grandfather's stroke. Upright, present, ready, he told them the numbers. Not all at once, he started with what had been spent on them, so they could understand that a portion had gone to legitimate care. Then he told them what had been redirected. His mother's expression didn't change during the telling. That was one of the things about Helen Cole when something truly landed. Her face didn't show it. What showed was the stillness. The absolute careful stillness of a woman keeping herself together. His father looked at the table. He was quiet for a long time. Finally, Robert said, "He told us your business was struggling." "It wasn't," Ethan said. "I know that now." Robert looked up. "I think I knew it at the time. But when someone tells you your child is doing badly, you don't press them on it. You just worry and accept what you're given and try not to be a problem." "You weren't a problem," Ethan said. Robert looked at his son with the steady, unembellished directness that had always been the most characteristic thing about him. "Ethan, we were living in a chicken coop." The sentence hung in the air. "I know," Ethan said. "I'm not saying that to make you feel worse than you already do," his father said. "I'm saying it because I want us to be honest now. No more assuming things are fine when they're not. No more letting the other person off the hook because it's easier." Helen put her hand on the table, palm up. Robert put his hand over hers. They sat like that for a moment, the quiet of two people who had been through something together that they would never quite be able to describe to anyone who hadn't been inside it. Ethan looked at them. His throat was tight. "What do you need from me?" he asked. His father looked at him with something that was not forgiveness exactly, and not blame exactly, but something that held both and had moved past both. "Come home more," Robert said. "That's all." Marcus came to the inn on a Thursday evening, 5 days after Ethan had taken his parents there. He did not call ahead. He appeared in the lobby at 6:30, and the night clerk, the same one who had shaken Robert's hand on the first night, directed him upstairs with the uncomfortable deference people show when they can feel trouble coming. He knocked on Robert's door. Ethan answered. Marcus looked older than he had in the backyard of the farm under the flashlight. Or maybe the lobby light was less forgiving. There were shadows under his eyes that suggested he had not been sleeping well, and a tension in his jaw that he was working to keep out of his expression. He wore a clean shirt. He had combed his hair. He had prepared for this, whatever this was going to be. "I'd like to talk to Mom and Dad," he said. Ethan stepped back from the door. He did not invite Marcus in or tell him no. He simply made space and waited to see what his parents would do. Robert was sitting at the table. Helen was in the armchair by the window. They looked at Marcus with the calm attention of people who have had time to think about what they want to say and have decided that listening is the better opening. Marcus came in. He stood rather than sat, which gave him a certain physical authority over the conversation, even in a room that was not his. He looked at his parents for a moment. "I understand Ethan's upset," he said. He kept his voice measured and reasonable, the voice of the older brother explaining something the younger one had gotten emotional about. "And I understand he hired a lawyer. That's his choice. But I want you both to hear some things from me directly, not through a legal filter." Neither parent responded. They watched. First, Marcus said the Coop. "That was not an ideal situation. I know that. But the master bedroom has a moisture issue. I've had 3 contractors look at it, and neither of you wanted the disruption of having workers in the house for weeks. Dad, you told me yourself last spring that you didn't want strangers in the house." Robert said nothing. Second, Marcus continued the money. "What Ethan told you, that's his interpretation. Running a property is expensive. Taxes, insurance, repairs, maintenance on 85 acres. He's been in Austin. He doesn't see what's involved. The money went where it needed to go." "To your vacation property," Ethan said from the doorway. Marcus looked at him. "That was a loan. A family loan. It would have been paid back. When the farm sale went through." Marcus turned back to his parents. "Which is actually the most important thing I want you to understand. The sale, Ethan's making it sound like I was doing something behind your backs. I wasn't. We talked about this. Dad, you know we talked about this." Robert's expression remained even. "You asked me once if I thought the farm would be easier to let go of when we got older," he said. "I told you I hadn't thought about it. That's not a conversation about a sale." Something shifted in Marcus's face. He recovered quickly. "Dad, come on. You've been saying for years that the property is too much to maintain. The taxes alone, the taxes are paid," Robert said. "Every year. By Ethan." Marcus pivoted. He turned to Helen, who had not spoken. He looked at his mother with something that resembled appeal, the way younger children used to go to the softer parent when the other one had said no. "Mom," he said, "I know this looks bad, but think about what Ethan is actually doing here. He shows up after 3 years. He hires a lawyer. He's filed paperwork to freeze the farm, your home, without asking you what you want. Who does that sound like it's protecting?" Helen looked at her son. "He's trying to take control of your affairs," Marcus said. That's what the lawyer is for. He's been gone his whole adult life. He doesn't know what's best for this family. I've been here. I've been the one who stayed. Helen looked at him for a long moment, with the expression of a woman processing something she has known for some time, and is now deciding how to name. "You have been here," she said finally. And that was all she said. It was not agreement. It was not disagreement. It was an acknowledgement so precisely limited that it could not be used as anything. Marcus looked at Robert. "Dad, I'm asking you to tell Ethan to call off the lawyer. Let's handle this as a family." Robert looked at his older son for a long moment. "Your mother and I will talk about it," he said. It was the closest thing to concession either parent had offered, and Marcus took it. He said he's understood. He said he just wanted what was best for everyone. He said he'd let them rest, and they could call him when they'd had a chance to think. He looked at Ethan once on his way out, and it was not a hostile look. It was the look of a man who believes he is still winning. The door closed. The room was quiet. Helen got up from the armchair and went to the window. She stood with her back to both of them for a moment, looking out at the parking lot. "He's very good at that," she said. Not to either of them specifically, just to the room. Ethan looked at his father. Robert had not moved from the table. His hands were folded in front of him, and he was looking at the middle distance. "She almost went with him," Robert said. It was the exact sentence he had said the first night, a fact stated without blame, without comfort. Just precision. Helen turned from the window. She looked at her husband. She looked at her son. "Not almost," she said quietly. For about 30 seconds, I believed it. She sat back down in the armchair. She picked up her book. After a moment, Ethan said, "Did you want to?" She opened the book to her page. "I wanted it to be simpler," she said. "That's different." She began to read. Robert reached for his newspaper. Ethan sat down in the desk chair by the wall and waited out the quiet, which felt like something being decided not by either of them, not by Marcus, but by some part of his family that had been deciding things long before any of them arrived. The next morning was a Friday. Robert had an early call with Pat's office about his medical records. Helen and Ethan were alone at the table by the window, and the morning light was gray and flat in the way it gets in October before the sun has decided to commit to the day. Ethan was on his second cup of coffee when his mother set her own cup down and said, "I need to ask you something." He waited. She looked at her hands for a moment. Her hands that had written lesson plans for 32 years, that had patched his jeans and pressed his shirts and iced his arm when he fell from the hayloft. She looked at them as if she were gathering herself through them. "Did you ever tell Marcus," she said, "that you were embarrassed by us?" The question hit him like something physical. "No," he said. "What?" "No." She nodded, but not in a way that meant she'd fully released the question. More as if she'd been expecting this answer, but needed to hear it said out loud before she could do anything with it. "About 8 months ago," she said, "Marcus told your father and me that you had spoken to him, that you had, this is how he put it, explained that your business was at a stage where you had clients and partners visiting from other cities, and that some of them sometimes passed through this part of Virginia. And that you'd asked Marcus to be sure we understood that we should stay home on those occasions, that we shouldn't be out in front of the property." Ethan stared at her. "He said you were embarrassed," Helen said. "By the farm. By where you came from. By us." She said it without flinching, which meant it had cost her something to practice saying it without flinching. "He said you wanted to maintain a certain image for your clients. That the word he used was liability. That having people see where you'd grown up would create the wrong impression." That is not true, Ethan said. I know that now. Helen looked at him directly. I want you to know that I believed it for about 4 months. Not entirely. Not without doubt. But somewhat. She paused. Because you hadn't been home in 3 years. And when you called on Sunday evenings, and the conversations were short, and you always sounded busy, and you always said everything was fine without asking whether it was. And when someone you know well tells you something about someone you love, but don't see it's harder to dismiss it than it should be. Ethan felt the weight of that settle into him. Not just what Marcus had said, but the conditions that had made it possible to say it. His absence. His short calls. His habit of asking if things were fine rather than asking what things actually were. And then he moved us to the Coop. Helen said. He said it was temporary. He said you knew. That you had suggested it actually, that you'd told him the farmhouse needed renovation before you brought potential buyers through, and that it was better for us not to be underfoot during that process. She stopped. I want you to understand that by that point I knew it wasn't right. I knew something was badly wrong, but I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't want to call you and cause a scene, in case it was true, in case you really had said those things and I was the one who misunderstood, Mom, Ethan said. He couldn't find the next word. He sat with it. Helen picked up her coffee. Her hands were steady. She had the self-possession of a woman who has chosen to tell a hard truth because she's decided that living with the unsaid version is worse, and who is now on the other side of that choice and finding it less terrible than anticipated. I kept your last birthday card, she said. The one with the farm drawing on the front. You wrote inside it, I can quote it exactly because I read it several times. You wrote, I'm proud of where I come from. It made me who I am. I kept it in my coat pocket for months. She looked at the window. After Marcus said what he said, I took it out. I read it again, and I had to decide either you wrote that and meant it or you didn't. Either the card was true or Marcus was. She looked at her son. I couldn't decide which I was more afraid of, she said. If Marcus was lying, then what had been done to us was terrible. If you had meant what you wrote, then I couldn't understand how both things could be true at the same time. They couldn't be, Ethan said. He lied. I know. She set her cup down. I stopped believing him about 5 months in, not because of any one thing, because of the accumulation of it. The way he talked about you when he thought I wasn't listening closely. The way he never let us call you directly from the landline. The way he answered questions about you with other questions. She paused. But by then we were already in the Coop, and I didn't know how to get out without making everything worse. Ethan looked at his mother. He had always thought of her as the practical one, the one who moved through hard things without dramatics, because she had learned somewhere in the long work of raising 2 sons and teaching other people's children that dramatics consumed energy she couldn't spare. He was seeing now that what had always looked like practicality was something harder to achieve. It was the management of a very precise dignity under conditions that had no interest in dignifying her. I'm sorry, he said. For every Sunday call I kept short. For every year I didn't come home. For every time I let the distance feel easier to maintain than to cross. He stopped. I can't undo that, but I can stop. His mother was quiet for a long moment. I'm glad you came back, she said finally. It was the same thing she had said in the Coop on the first night. But it landed differently now, not as reassurance, but as a statement of preference. She was glad. Not just that the problem was being addressed, but that he specifically was the one doing it. That was the difference. The door to Robert's room opened. They heard him on the phone, asking a question about documents. Helen picked up her book. Ethan refilled his coffee. Outside the window, the morning light had made its decision and was arriving pale gold and low through the trees. Diane Cole called on a Saturday afternoon. Ethan was in the inn parking lot on a call with his office when her number appeared on his phone, a number he'd stored years ago but rarely used. He ended the business call and answered. "I need to see you somewhere," Diane said. "Not at the inn and not near the farm." Her voice was level, but something was running underneath it, a current of effort, the sound of a decision being maintained rather than made. "Okay," Ethan said. "We're the diner on Route 11 in Buchanan. Do you know it?" He did. It was 40 minutes north, a different county. When 2 hours, he got there first and took a booth by the window. When Diane arrived, she came in wearing a barn coat and a hat pulled low, less like someone avoiding recognition and more like someone who had stopped caring about the cold. She was 46. She had known Marcus for 20 years and been married to him for 16. She and Ethan had never been unfriendly, but they had also never been close. She existed in his mental map of the family as a presence who was thoroughly Marcus's and therefore not entirely accessible. He was revising that map now. She sat down across from him and ordered coffee without looking at the menu. She put her hands on the table. She did not begin with pleasantries. "I haven't been sleeping properly in about 8 months," she said, "since the furniture went to the barn." Ethan waited. "I told him to stop twice," she said. "The first time was when he moved your parents out of the bedroom. He said it was temporary. He said the renovation required it. I said the renovation he was talking about hadn't started yet. He said it was about to start. The renovation never started." She looked at her coffee. "The second time was when I found out about the sale. He told me it was your parents' decision. He said Robert had specifically asked him to handle it. I asked to talk to Robert about it directly, and Marcus said he'd handle the conversation." She paused. "I never had the conversation." She reached into her coat pocket and removed her phone. She placed it on the table between them and slid it across. "Everything on there is relevant," she said. "I want you to look at it. I'm going to go to the restroom, and when I come back, you can tell me what you need." She stood and walked to the back of the diner. Ethan picked up the phone. The photo album she'd opened had 147 photos in it, dates stamped across 14 months. He scrolled through them in order. The first images showed the Cole farmhouse as it had always looked, the main bedroom with his parents' furniture, the rose bushes by the front walk, the kitchen with Helen's things on the shelves. Then, beginning about 8 months ago, the photos shifted. The dresser gone from the bedroom, the bedside tables, a series of photos taken from across the yard, showing 2 men loading items into a truck. Marcus and another man, exactly what Sarah's camera had captured, but from a different angle that showed the receiving end, the barn, and where they were carrying things. Into the barn, and then in the background of one photo toward the coop, then the coop itself. 3 photos taken over the course of several months. In the first, it was empty. In the second, a cot had been set up, a plastic bin, an extension cord running in through a gap at the base. In the third, a coat on a hook behind the door, boots on the floor, a battery lantern on a crate. His parents' boots. His mother's coat. He scrolled to the text messages. The thread between Marcus and a contact, saved as Westbrook TK, ran across 4 months. The messages were ordinary at first: property dimensions, county records, closing timelines. Then the conversation shifted. "Marcus need confirmation on the private arrangement. What's the finder's fee structure? Westbrook TK 47K upon closing. Wired to the account you specified. Marcus good, keep that between us. The POA documentation is clean. Westbrook TK understood. Flagging closing target for 17 days from next week. That work, Marcus works. Ethan read it twice. A private finder's fee of $47,000 wired to an account of Marcus's choosing upon closing a sale that Marcus had arranged using a power of attorney that did not authorize self-dealing. A fee Marcus had not disclosed to his parents. A fee that made Marcus not just a fraudulent POA holder, but a financially interested party in the transaction, which was a different order of legal problem. Diane came back and sat down. She looked at the phone, then at Ethan. "The finder's fee," he said. "Yes." "Did you know about it before you saw the messages?" "No." "I found those messages 6 weeks ago. I was looking for something else on his phone, a contractor contact, and I saw the thread." She folded her hands around her mug. "He doesn't know I've seen them." Ethan slid the phone back across the table. "I need copies of everything. The photos and the texts. Do you want my attorney to request them through a formal channel or—" "I'll forward what you need right now," she said. "I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm not looking for a deal or immunity or for anyone to go easy on him. She stopped. She looked at the window. "I just want it to stop. I want to be able to look at his parents without feeling like what I am." She paused. "Whatever that is." Ethan gave her Pat's contact information. Diane forwarded the photos and texts from her phone to Pat's email address while they sat there. The diner noise continued around them, the ordinary sound of people eating lunch on a Saturday, completely unaware of what was crossing a phone screen 2 tables over. "Will you need to testify?" Ethan asked. "If I need to, I will." She said it without drama, the way people say things when they've already rehearsed the cost and decided it's worth paying. She left first. Ethan sat with his coffee for another 10 minutes, and then called Pat. "Check your email," he said. A silence on the other end as Pat opened it. A longer silence as she read. "The finder's fee," she said. "Yes." "Ethan." Her voice had changed slightly, not excitement, but a kind of professional settling the way things sound when something expected but hoped for actually materializes. With this, his use of the POA isn't just negligent overreach, it's self-dealing under fiduciary authority. That's a distinct offense. His criminal exposure just changed considerably. Ethan looked out the diner window at the highway. A truck passed going south. "Good," he said. "Schedule the hearing." Marcus filed the countermotion on a Monday. Pat called Ethan at 7 in the morning with the news. The motion claimed that Ethan Cole was unlawfully interfering with Marcus Cole's lawfully held power of attorney over Robert Cole, and that Ethan's actions, including the emergency property injunction and the engagement of Patricia Moran, constituted deliberate efforts to seize control of his parents' affairs for his own financial benefit. The motion requested that the court recognize Marcus's existing authority and dismiss the injunction. "He's moved faster than I expected," Pat said. "But this actually helps us. A counter-motion forces the hearing schedule forward. The judge will want to hear both sides before the injunction expires." When 8 days. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "What do we need to do differently?" "Nothing. We continue as planned. The difference is the timeline. We now have 8 days instead of 3 weeks to make sure our presentation is complete." She paused. "There's one more thing. This morning, a reporter from the Roanoke Valley Courier called my office. She said she'd received a tip about a wealthy businessman attempting to use elder law proceedings to gain control of a family farm." Ethan set down his coffee. "She's working on a story," Pat said. The framing of the tip, wealthy businessman, control of a family farm, matches Marcus's counter-motion language almost exactly. He's talking to the press. "What do we do?" "You don't comment. My office releases a brief statement today, Something clean and accurate. Our clients are Robert and Helen Cole, who are seeking legal protection of their rights and property. Nothing else. She paused. The press story is annoying, but it's not fatal. What matters is what happens in the courtroom. Judges read newspapers, but they also read evidence. The story ran 2 days later, half a page in the Thursday edition. It was not flattering to Ethan. It described a legal dispute between two brothers over a family farm, noting that the elder brother had managed the property for decades, while the younger had built a successful business out of state. It quoted a source unidentified as saying the younger brother had arrived unannounced and filed legal papers within 24 hours without consulting his parents. Ethan read it at the inn breakfast table. His father was sitting across from him, reading the same article in the print edition. He read it with the same steady attention he gave to everything. When he finished, he folded the paper and set it down. "That source is Marcus," Robert said. "Yes. I'd like to speak at the hearing." Robert said it the same way he said most things, without emphasis, as if the decision had been made some time ago, and this was simply the announcement. "Pat said that's possible," Ethan said. "It'll be up to the judge. It's not a full trial, it's a hearing on the injunction and the POA challenge. But she thinks your testimony would be significant." "It would be mine," Robert said. "Not a lawyer's version of it." "I know." "Then I'd like to." Ethan looked at his father. He was 73 with a hip that had been surgically replaced and a back that had been battered by 4 decades of physical labor. He was sitting in an inn room wearing a flannel shirt and reading glasses, and he had the bearing of a man who has decided something and does not intend to be moved from it. Ethan thought about the moment in the courtroom that was coming. About his father, who had poured the foundation of the farmhouse with his own hands in 1968, being asked to describe signing a paper he couldn't clearly read in a hospital bed with opioids in his bloodstream. It was not a dignified image. Robert knew that. He was choosing to offer it anyway, choosing to be the evidence, not just the subject. That evening, Helen made an unexpected announcement of her own. She was sitting at the small table writing something in longhand, which she did occasionally: notes, lists, the occasional letter, an anachronism she had never apologized for. She looked up when Ethan came in. "I called your brother today," she said. Ethan stopped. "He answered," she said. "I told him I'd seen the newspaper article. He told me he was trying to protect us, that you were the one causing the disruption, that the legal process would take months and hurt us more than it helped." She looked at what she'd been writing, then set the pen down. "I told him that I had been listening to him tell me things that were not true for 8 months, and that I was done." "What did he say?" "He said he was sorry that I felt that way." She picked up her pen again. "That's not the same as being sorry." Ethan sat down at the other chair. He didn't say anything for a moment. "Are you all right?" he asked. His mother looked at him over the top of her reading glasses with the expression she'd had for as long as he could remember, the one that meant she appreciated the question and had already processed the answer. "I've been all right through worse than this," she said. "I just wanted you to know I made the call myself. Nobody told me to." She went back to her writing. Ethan sat across from her in the room's quiet and thought about the hearing that was 8 days away, about what they had built, the forensic accounting, the hospital records, the footage from Sarah's camera, Diane's photos and text messages, Robert's lockbox documents. Each piece found and carried by someone who had been paying attention when it mattered. He thought about his father asking to testify in his own voice, about his mother making a phone call she didn't tell anyone about the things his parents had done quietly while he was absent, keeping records, holding on to evidence, choosing not to let go of the truth, even when it had cost them comfort and dignity to hold it. He had thought when he drove down from Roanoke that he was coming to rescue them. He was beginning to understand that they had been rescuing themselves in their own way for months. They had just needed someone to show up and finish it. The hearing was in 8 days. The Roanoke County Courthouse was a brick building from the 1940s that had been renovated twice without losing its original sense of unhurried gravity. Ethan arrived at 8:45 on a Tuesday morning in late October. Pat was already there, briefcase open on the hallway bench, going through documents with the focused efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this since before breakfast. Robert and Helen sat beside each other on the bench outside the courtroom. Helen was wearing the blue wool coat she had bought for her retirement ceremony. Ethan hadn't known that until this morning when she'd put it on, and he recognized it from an old photograph. Robert wore a suit he had owned for 20 years that still fit him because he had never stopped working, and his body had not taken that as permission to change. Marcus arrived with his attorney at 9:03. He was in a dark gray sport coat. He did not look at his parents when he came through the hall. His attorney, a man from Roanoke named Carver who specialized in estate and property disputes, spoke briefly to Pat at the bench in voices too low to hear. The conversation was professional and unrevealing. The judge was a woman named Hollis. She was in her late 50s and had the quality that effective judges develop over years of hearing arguments from both sides of things. She had no personal stake in absolute patience for the process. Zero patience for performance. She reviewed the filings before opening the floor. She asked Pat to present first. Pat laid it out in sequence. She had been preparing this presentation for 3 weeks, and it showed not in theatrics, but in the specific absence of them. She stated facts. She handed documents to the clerk. She cited statutes. The power of attorney signed on post-operative day 2 following a hip replacement, when the signatory was on 60 hours of prescribed oxycodone. Hospital records attached. Witness credibility. One witness had a documented relationship with Marcus Cole predating the document. The second had professional associations with a notary shop whose license had been suspended for authentication irregularities. Neither witness had been disclosed as having a prior relationship with the beneficiary. The financial record wire transfer documentation showing $594,000 sent to the Cole family care account over 11 years. Forensic accounting showing $431,000 redirected to accounts in Marcus Cole's name or for his personal benefit, including a vacation property purchase in South Carolina. The parents received $800 per month during this period and were told the reduced amount was the full extent of Ethan's contributions. The physical displacement security camera footage from the neighboring property time-stamped, showing removal of the parents' bedroom furniture from the main farmhouse. 3 photographs taken from inside the converted outbuilding showing the living conditions over a period of 8 months. The private arrangement text messages between Marcus Cole and a representative of Westbrook Development, confirming a private finder's fee of $47,000 to be paid to Marcus. Upon closing an interest Marcus had not disclosed to the principals of the POA, the property owners, or the counterparty's attorney. Under Virginia law, a POA holder who enters a transaction from which they derive personal benefit without disclosure is acting in breach of fiduciary duty. Marcus's attorney made his arguments methodically. Marcus had managed the property for years at personal cost. The POA had been explained to Robert before signing. The financial account was a management account, not a personal account. The co-op arrangement had been temporary and had been mischaracterized. He argued that the injunction was an overreach based on an estranged sibling's dramatic intervention. Judge Hollis listened without expression. Then she looked at Pat and said, "I understand you have a witness." Robert Cole walked to the stand without assistance, although he moved slowly. He sat in the chair and adjusted the microphone with the deliberate competence of a man who repairs things that need repairing and doesn't fuss about it. Judge Hollis let him tell it in his own words. She asked a few questions of clarification. She let him finish each sentence. He described the surgery. He described waking in the recovery room. He described Marcus appearing beside his bed with a clipboard and explaining it as paperwork the hospital required for discharge coordination. He said he'd asked if it could wait. Marcus had said it was time-sensitive. He'd helped Robert hold the pen. He described the following 8 months without particular elaboration. He described being asked to stay toward the back of the property when visitors came. He described being told that Ethan had suggested this. He described the incremental removal of his furniture and his wife's things from the rooms they had occupied for 40 years. He described the coop, the cot, the lantern, the extension cord, the space heater. He said they had been told this was temporary. "Did you ask your son Ethan whether he had requested these arrangements?" Judge Hollis asked. Robert looked at the judge. "No," he said, "because I was told he knew, and I didn't want to bother him." The phrase landed quietly. Ethan, sitting in the gallery, felt it the way you feel something when you realize it's the center of something not dramatic, not even particularly loud, but the thing everything else is organized around. Robert looked at the courtroom directly. "I built that house in 1968, he said. "I poured the foundation myself. My wife helped me paint every room in it. We raised 2 sons there." He paused. "I did not ask to leave it." Marcus was looking at the floor. Judge Hollis took a recess of 25 minutes. When she returned, she was brief. She voided the power of attorney. Procedural defects in witness disclosure combined with documentation of self-dealing in the transaction it was used to execute made it defective under Virginia Code. She blocked the property sale and issued a protective order preventing any transfer of the Cole property without direct court approval and the verified uncoerced consent of both Robert and Helen Cole. She noted that the forensic accounting presented by the plaintiff constituted credible evidence of elder financial abuse under Virginia statute, and referred the matter to the Roanoke County Commonwealth's Attorney's Office for criminal review. She looked at Marcus over her reading glasses for a moment. She said nothing specific to him. The documentation had already said what needed to be said. Marcus and his attorney left the courtroom without speaking to anyone. Ethan watched him go through the gallery door, the same door they'd both come in as boys when their father had brought them to watch a county commission meeting, and told them this was how civic things worked. Helen stood and put on the blue coat. Robert picked up his hat from the bench beside him. They walked out into the corridor together with the steadiness of 2 people who have been through something and have come out of it with their footing intact. Ethan met them in the hall. His father put out his hand. Ethan shook it, and Robert pulled him in and held him briefly with one arm the way fathers do when they are not especially given to demonstrativeness, but have reached the point where not doing it would cost more than doing it. "Take us home," Robert said. "The inn is fine, but a bed should be familiar." Ethan nodded. They walked out into the October light together. 6 months is not enough time to undo what years have done, but it is enough time to start. By the following April, the Cole farmhouse had been cleaned and repainted. The moisture in the master bedroom turned out to be real, a cracked flashing above the window, which a licensed contractor identified in January and repaired in 2 days. It was a 2-day job, not a reason to move anyone anywhere. The repairs cost $900. A woman named Gail Mercer had moved into the attached guest room in February. She was a professional caregiver with 17 years of experience and a specialty in aging-in-place support. She drove Helen to appointments, helped Robert manage the property's lighter maintenance tasks, and cooked dinner on weeknights. She was competent, unobtrusive, and had introduced herself on the first morning by asking Helen what she didn't want help with, which was, Helen later told Ethan, exactly the right question. The Cole family care account had been closed and replaced with a trust managed by Patricia Moran's office. Ethan's monthly contribution went into the trust dispersed quarterly for verified care expenses. Robert and Helen had separate personal accounts in their own names. They had access to their own money. This was not a complicated arrangement. It was simply what the arrangement should have been from the beginning. Marcus faced 3 criminal counts in Roanoke County Circuit Court: elder financial abuse fraud, in connection with a power of attorney, and breach of fiduciary duty in a self-dealing transaction. His attorney had entered a not guilty plea. A trial date had been set for 7 months out. He was living in a rental in Roanoke. He and Diane had separated in December. Diane had moved back to her sister's place in Bristol and was cooperating with the Commonwealth's attorney as a material witness. The vacation property in Myrtle Beach had been placed under a civil lien pending restitution proceedings. No one in the family had spoken to Marcus since the courtroom. Helen had called him once. 3 months after the hearing, she told Ethan about it afterward quietly, without inviting commentary. She'd said what she needed to say. She hadn't asked for a response, and she hadn't offered forgiveness. She'd simply said she was done. It was the most direct sentence she had ever said to him, and it had cost her nothing by the time she said it. Westbrook Development had withdrawn from the property entirely following the court order. They had retained their own counsel and were conducting an internal review of how the transaction had been approved. Ethan had not pursued them separately. Pat said there would be time for that if the criminal proceedings opened avenues. Ethan flew down from Austin on a Saturday in mid-April. He drove the rental from Roanoke, the same route he had taken in October. County Road 7 gravel, edged the same oak and maple overhead, the same fence line at the Crawford place. He did not call ahead, which had become its own habit, now simply arriving. His parents had stopped asking why he didn't call first. His mother had a theory that it was because he liked seeing what was real rather than what people prepared, and she had told him this with a dryness that suggested she approved. He turned into the driveway. No strange trucks. No unfamiliar vehicles. The rose bushes along the front walk were beginning to show new growth, at the tips tentative and green. Helen was on the porch with a glass of tea. She lifted a hand when she saw the rental car. She did not come down the steps, because that would have been too close to making a fuss, and she still didn't do that. But she was there when he arrived, and that was its own kind of greeting. Gail was inside starting dinner. Robert was somewhere on the property, a walk, Helen said. He'd taken to walking the perimeter in the afternoons since the weather had broken. Ethan found him at the back fence line, moving along the path between the old barn and the outbuildings with the careful deliberateness of a man who is not in a hurry and has learned to treat physical limitation as something to accommodate rather than fight. He had his cane, and he was looking at the land as he walked at the fallow fields that would need to be leased to a working farmer before next season, at the woodline along the ridge, at the sky above it, which was clear and very blue. He saw Ethan coming and waited. They walked together toward the cluster of outbuildings. They didn't say much. Robert had always been a man who held conversations differently outdoors. Fewer words, more space between them, less urgency. They walked past the barn, past the storage shed, and stopped in front of the chicken coop. A new panel of corrugated steel covered the original opening. The old plywood door was gone, replaced during the January work by something more permanent and more final. A padlock hung on the latch, heavy and rust-resistant. The extension cord was gone. The window had been covered from the inside. The coop was closed and would stay closed. Robert stood in front of it for a long moment. "I thought about tearing it down," he said. Ethan looked at him. "Why didn't you?" Robert looked at the padlocked door. His hand was on his cane. The afternoon light was long and golden and fell across the side of the coop, across the weathered board and batten siding, across the year's worth of what that building had held and meant. So I don't forget, Robert said. How close we got. They stood in silence for another moment. Then Robert turned and started back toward the house. Ethan walked beside him. The path curved around the barn and past the wood storage shed, and from there they could see the farmhouse with the porch light on and the kitchen window lit from inside where Gail was working, and Helen still on the porch with her tea watching them come across the field. She raised her hand again when she saw them. Ethan raised his hand back. They walked toward the light. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. And if you've ever fought to protect someone you love, we'd like to hear from you.